Hi, this is Matthew Baldwin of Mars Hill University, and this is the Ideas of Jesus podcast. This is episode 8, I believe, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jen Isle and Dr. Erin Roberts, and I'm so glad that the two of you could be here today with me. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Excited. To be honest, for the viewership, just so that we can explain some of the giggles that we might have today, we did try to record this interview last week and totally failed. I failed. So this is a second take. And I think that's got us all in a little bit of a silly mood, but I'm so glad that you could join me. Let me introduce you guys for the viewership and the listeners of our video podcast. Jennifer Isle is Associate Professor of Religion at Tufts University. Dr. Isle is a scholar trained in classics and the study of religion and works on ancient Christianity and ancient Mediterranean religions. She has published articles in journals such as Method and Theory in the Study of Religion and the Journal for the Study of the New Testament, and has recently published the book Signs, Wonders, and Gifts, Divination in the Letters of Paul with Oxford, 2019. She's working on a new book project which examines the role of fidelity in shaping early Christ groups. Erin Roberts is Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Roberts is a scholar trained in classics, philosophy, and the study of religion. Her expertise is in the ways that classical Greek, Hellenistic, and Roman philosophy impacted the formation of Christianity. She publishes in journals such as Method and Theory in the Study of Religion, and along with Dr. Isle, is the co-editor of Christian Tourist Attractions, Mythmaking and Identity Formation, Bloomsbury, 2018. Dr. Roberts was co-chair with William Arnall of the Redescribing Christian Origins Research Group for 6 years and currently serves on the steering committees of 2 SBL units, the Historical Jesus Unit, as well as the Social Scientific Criticism of the New Testament Unit. She is currently completing a book, Emotion, Morality, and Matthew's Mythic Jesus, which is under contract with the Oxford University Press series, Emotions of the Past. One thing I appreciate about both of you is that your research on the literature of Christian antiquity includes what I think is a self-reflexive turn. You've examined the ways, for example, that translators translate the same words differently when they appear in texts we call Christian than when they appear in texts that we might call classical or by non-Christian authors. There are consequences for how we think of what early Christians were up to if we translate ecclesia as church or hamartia as sin. Those translation practices are examples of how contemporary scholars who claim merely to be doing history may also be reinforcing the special status or supposedly unique place of early Christian texts in the study of religion. But in the book that you edited together on Christian tourist attractions, you really brought that self-reflexive element to the fore. You're trained as scholars of antiquity, but you ended up studying how contemporary American pop culture attractions represent Christian and Israelite antiquity. In your contribution to that volume, Jen, you focused on the role of anachronism in these venues so that contemporary people can see their own times reflected in a representation of the past. Erin, you focused on what you called embodied mythic formation, talking about the ways these attractions actually incorporate visitors into a contemporary simulation of an ancient world in a way designed to form and mold them as subjects. Now, this podcast is called Ideas of Jesus, and what I'm excited to talk about today is how these kinds of attractions use ideas or representations of Jesus. I want to talk about what you call myth-making and anachronism and embodied mythic formation and how that relates to the way Jesus is portrayed or imagined in these tourist attractions. But to start with, many listeners to this podcast may never have even visited or known that such a thing as a Christian tourist attraction exists. So I want to throw this out there to begin with. What kinds of places are we talking about? Can you tell us about some examples of Christian tourist attractions?
Erin, do you want to go or I can answer? Well, Erin and I both were sort of curious about the way that ancient ideas get reformulated in the material realm today. And when I was teaching in a small school in Ohio called the College of Worcester, nearby there was this fascinating museum that really captured my attention. And I even sent my students there to do a project on it, where people had built the people associated with the church next door had built a wax and fiberglass museum of different Israelite, Judean, and Christian figures. And at the same time, Erin was encountering another museum in the South, the Holy Land Experience. So we were kind of in two different places geographically, but encountering similar types of sites. And then we started thinking about it, and there are actually a lot of them. There's I did the Bible Walk Museum, but there's the Holy Land Experience, the Museum of the Bible, the Creation Museum, the Ark Experience. And so they range in size and I guess professionalism from very well-funded, expensive animatronics type venues to roadside attractions that have, 3 rooms and that's about it. But so there's a whole bunch of these types of venues across the country. And the book has 2 chapters that deal with Christian tours that go to Israel, which are Christian Zionist tours. Isn't that right? There's 2 of them. So I don't know if Erin wants to say a little bit about those.
Sure. Yeah. As you were talking, Jen, I was trying to remember exactly, why and how we got interested in Christian tourist attractions, but, we can talk more about that when we talk later in the podcast. But yeah, the two chapters that deal with tours of Israel are interesting because it seems that those Christians are going to Israel as an attraction unto itself, right? Not just as maybe pilgrims or pious people, but also for the tourism aspects. And one of the chapters deals with the Christian celebration of the Jewish holiday Sukkot in Jerusalem. And so it's a very large Christian Zionist group, and people from all over the world gather not only to celebrate this holiday, kind of to feel like they're participating in something that Jesus did, but also for political purposes, to kind of lobby for Israel. And the other tour, also involved Israel, but that one focuses more on specific sites related to Jesus's life, and specific sites related to what the Christians refer to as the Old Testament. So even though the ones in the US, we can call those tourist attractions, we don't want to call Israel itself a tourist attraction, but the reason they're going, there are tourism kind of aims involved in that. So, yeah.
Well, that really brings me nicely to my next question, which, I hear you saying, tourism, but I also have heard you saying pilgrimage or something like that. And so I'm wondering about, especially the tourist attractions that you all wrote about here in the States, is visiting places like this akin to religious pilgrimage, or is it more tourism, or is there really a meaningful distinction to draw there in your thinking?
The book doesn't really get into the distinction between tourism and pilgrimage. There are people who work on that, but that's not what the point of the book was.
Well, we don't have ancient places to go visit in America.
Right. And as we mentioned in the earlier incarnation of this interview, Erin was pointing out that these sites are typically Protestant in the United States. In fact, I think almost all of them are Protestant. And as she was speaking, I remember thinking, oh yeah, this is true. And why is that true? And it's because for the historical artifacts, largely, those are in possession in the Catholic Church. And so Catholics they have the Vatican Museum if they want to go there. They have tons of early Christian churches if they'd like to go there. And in fact, even to this day, most, if not all, Catholic churches are consecrated by including either a relic or a contact relic in the altar. So Protestant churches don't have these objects. So one of the ways around that is to sort of recreate the whole scene, right?
We don't have relics, but we have recreations of the past.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And you mentioned that most of these places are Protestant in, I suppose you mean, but the people who are putting them together, are the audiences typically Christian and Protestant, or is it a mixed audience? Does it include tourists who are just there to see the sites, or is it more of church groups and religious folks, or do you have any data on that?
I don't really have data on who was visiting, kind of the whole group of sites. Sorry, there's a cat asking for food. We didn't really collect data on who was visiting. At least anecdotally, I visited the Creation Museum several times, and Jen has been there as well. There are signs that do ask visitors to maintain a certain level of piety, meaning, don't be laughing, don't be being silly, to kind of keep an atmosphere of gravitas, because this is serious business. Even though there are animatronic dinosaurs, munching on different things around you, and different things to look at.
That is really suggestive that there are these directions about how one should behave.
Right. And I did see something, sorry, behind me. I did see something similar at the Holy Land experience. When there were certain performances going on, people were asked to maintain, a certain level of decorum, and to recognize that even if they themselves were merely tourists, that there were also people there trying to kind of gain some kind of religious experience from visiting the place. Mm-hmm. I'd say that's probably similar with Ark Encounter and the Bible Museum. I haven't, I can't speak for Bible Walk.
I actually did ask that question at the Bible Walk Museum. And what's interesting about that particular site is that unlike the Ark Experience or the Creation Museum, which are very well funded, the Bible Walk Museum was built by the parishioners of the church next door. So it's a really large complex. It's really quite a large church, cavernous inside, but they built the museum. And so the people who operate the museum, the people who dress up as Moses and take you on the tour, the people who run the gift shop, they are all affiliated with the church. And what I got from my multiple trips there was that most of the people coming there are busloads of people coming down from their church in Cleveland or in Toledo. It's more of a Midwestern or even just regionally Ohio attraction, because most people don't even know that it exists. Yeah, so outside of that general region, I don't even know that they get any advertising.
That's helpful and interesting. Okay, well, I'm like to switch gears now and talk about the theoretical apparatus that you guys brought to bear in studying what's going on at these places. And your work involves, the book involves the word myth. You're talking about myth making, which we're going to get to in a second. But I think that some people who might be in the audience of this video podcast, my students or other interests, might be uncomfortable with scholars who are going to talk about Christianity or Jesus also talking about myth. So just to address the elephant in the room, first, I'm wondering if you could say a few words about what we should be thinking about when you use the term myth.
Yeah, I'd be happy to say a few things. When we're talking about myth, we're talking not about the truth register of the content of certain stories. We're talking about the way certain stories are designed to function. And so what we have in mind by myth, and similarly with myth making, when we're talking about myth, first of all, we're talking about narratives, we're talking about stories. We're talking about stories about the past that are told in such a way that they're supposed to be prescriptive or persuasive about social realities, conditions, hierarchies, organization within the present moment, right? So, sorry again about the cat. But so just as a quick example, people rely on myth, I think all the time. They may not even realize it, but I mean, something as kind of trite as it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, right? People are referring to a very old allegedly divinely sanctioned story that is supposed to somehow impinge on the present moment in ways that have social, religious, material consequences, right? So when we're talking about myth, we're talking about a kind of narrative about the past that is claimed to have some kind of authority to dictate how people behave in the present. Whether those stories about the past are true or false does not even enter the register of what we're talking about.
That was a really interesting example, really helpful example. We're going to let you get your cat out of the closet.
Okay, sorry.
That was a really interesting example. I'm glad you shared that. I think that's a perfect example. Do you have anything to add, Jen, in terms of thinking about what we mean by myth?
No, but I would definitely underscore what Erin has to say about when scholars, at least when religion scholars talk about myth, they are not talking about whether or not a story is true or false.
Yeah,
it's about what the story seeks to accomplish, for whom and for what purpose.
That's such a helpful way of framing it, and I know that people will appreciate hearing that. So now, can you help clarify then, what do we mean by myth making? In one word or two, myth making. How is that different from myth?
Well, I think it's effective whenever we take a noun and turn it into a gerund and we realize the labor that's involved in doing the thing, right? So, and I would say the same for anachronism. To make something an anachronism, like the labor that goes into doing that project. So myth making would be the process of creating that narrative.
So are we saying that the myths don't come to us ready formed, that people in our own moment are contemporaneously, constantly generating these new authoritative stories, or?
I would say that they're taking something that's already recognizable, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody's creating something unique. And we know that because it wouldn't be intelligible to anybody, right? So even just theory of knowledge or theory of, I don't know, even human cognition, maybe that we need to recognize something, for the basic level of intelligibility. So when Jen and I are talking about myth making in the book, and when the other authors are doing it as well, they're talking about kind of received myths, myths that are already present in the Christian tradition that have been kind of updated or put into material form, either through wax figures or through a gigantic ark, something like this. So they're familiar stories, but they're done kind of in a new time for a new audience with a new purpose.
When you bring in the idea of the gigantic ark, but earlier you mentioned, of course, also animatronic dinosaurs, and I'm thinking about multiple sources of, it's not just the Bible that's contributing these mythic forms that are then brought to life in these myth-making of other narratives as well. Like there were.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, if I may just throw this in here, the dinosaurs. Right. So I mean, this is a t-shirt that you can buy these kinds of t-shirts all over the place. Well, not all over the place, but online. This is Jesus with some dinosaurs, and it may look really silly and cute, and it kind of is. But dinosaurs are not mentioned in the Bible. But in the story as it's told in the Creation Museum, there were dinosaurs there. There were these large creatures, and we don't need to get into why that's the case, but. Sorry, I just got sidetracked because I started thinking about the flat earth view of dinosaurs and they don't believe in dinosaurs. So there's a lot at stake, and you're exactly right that there are these kind of modern cosmologies and modern like natural history narratives that are getting intertwined with the
woven in.
Yeah.
This takes us a little bit off the center, off of the top.
Yeah, sorry.
That's fine.
Can I add a detail real quick about these types of sites though? Because what Erin just said made me think of this. So some of them, the Museum of the Bible, the Ark Encounter, and the Creation Museum, they are built in a way that looks very much like a natural history museum. And so they take that aesthetic with the little placards that give you historical information, genus and species, and this sort of stuff, and give you data about the thing you're looking at. So it's using that aesthetic and that setup, and yet the information that it is conveying is quite contrary to anything you would ever get in a natural history museum.
So it takes you might call it the mythos of science and brings it in and
Yeah.
uses it as the frame. That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely.
That's a fascinating thing to point out. I don't know if that is a good transition or not, but Jen, let's talk about what you mean when you talk about anachronism. And you've already brought it up in terms of also being a gerund, like myth-making, anachronizing, I guess we might say, or something like making. Can you explain what anachronism is in your usage?
Yeah, so generally speaking, an anachronism is anything that's out of its place in time. So in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, there's a cuckoo clock. The cuckoo clock isn't invented until 1,000 years after Julius Caesar is assassinated, but it's useful in the play because it marks midnight, which turns into the Ides of March the next day, right? So it's useful in the play, but it doesn't belong. People who do, dress up in Civil War costumes or Revolutionary War costumes, and they go out and they reenact battles. There's actually a society called the Society for Creative Anachronism, and they dress up in medieval costumes and whatever. So anything that's out of its place in time, that can go forward. We can pretend to be in the future, or it can go backwards, either way. Now, aside from that, we live our lives in a practical daily way with a sense of sequence. So I did in fact wake up this morning before I brushed my teeth, right? That's the order in which things happen. So my interest in this site, the Bible Walk Museum, wasn't in the way that time gets carved up into different segments, like when did the concept of the hour come into being, or things like that. But I'm interested in our practical experience of sequence and the way that things can be put out of sequence, not by accident, but on purpose. So I had a scholar friend use an example in a separate conversation once, and he commented on how frustrated he was about his students who were turning in history exams that said things like, when George Washington freed the slaves in 1200, it really made King George mad. That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. None of those things happen at the same time. And you do it on purpose and you're wildly off, it becomes really noticeable and it's comical. But when it is done for ideological purposes, the anachronism, the intentional stitching in of events or figures in different places in time becomes hard to falsify because for ideological purposes, it is believed. Right. And so there's a lot of this that happens at the Bible Walk Museum, not because it's unique to the Bible Walk Museum. It's not unique at all. It happens all over the place. But I was particularly interested in the way that the figure of Jesus gets stitched into different points in history in that particular museum in a way that kind of pulls together a grand narrative, ultimately that claims that Jesus existed before the beginning of time. They're not quoting the Gospel of John explicitly, but it's that kind of idea, right? So Jesus shows up in the Hebrew Bible. Jesus shows up, in lots of different places where Jesus doesn't belong,
Now you're making me think of the Mojo Nixon song, Elvis is Everywhere, but Jesus is everywhere.
Right.
Can you give me or give us one or two examples of where Jesus shows up, where he
Sure. So I took some photos and I'll share my screen in a minute. So there are two examples that I'll give right now. One of them is from the book of Daniel. Now Daniel most scholars believe is written right around the Maccabean revolt, which is between 168 and 164 BCE. So it's written in the 2nd century BCE, but it's set centuries earlier in the Babylonian exile. And so that is also an interesting anachronism, right? But there are 3 figures in Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refuse to capitulate to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he throws them in a furnace. And in the Hebrew Bible, in the Septuagint, they don't burn because there's a 4th figure there. And that 4th figure is some kind of protective angel sent by God. So that's what the ancient text says. And again, it's written 200 or 160 something years before Christianity comes into being. So at the Bible Walk Museum, I'm going to share my screen. That 4th figure, can you see this? Is Jesus right here. So this is the 4th figure. Now, Jesus doesn't have a place in that text historically. So I was curious about the way that the narrative in Daniel gets co-opted into the Christian narrative at the Bible Museum. So that's the one example. Another example is at the end of, let me find, sorry, I'll close this one. Whoops, at the end of the tour, am I still sharing my screen?
You are not sharing your screen. That's good.
I'm not. Do you want me to show another one, or am I talking too long?
I'm fine with it. It's great.
Okay, what's that, Erin?
Show another one.
Okay, so at the end of that particular tour, Bible Walk has 4 different tours, at least that they did at the time. Now there might be 5. There's this scene in the Holy of Holies, which is the inner sanctum of the Jerusalem temple. And as far as we know, only one person is supposed to go into that inner sanctum once a year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and that is the high priest. So this is a rendition of the ark, and here's the high priest. But then there's like this mechanical thing that parts these curtains, and what you see is, behold, Jesus is in the Holy of Holies with the high priest in the Jerusalem temple. So this is the Jesus that's behind the curtains.
Oh, he's on the cross.
I did not expect him to be on the cross. I did not expect.
I didn't expect that at all.
Yeah, he's crucified on the cross in the Holy of Holies.
Did not expect.
Not a place where you would expect Jesus. So
that's a stunning example of an anachronism.
Yeah, so it's out of place chronologically. It's also out of place, in terms of location. But I'm more interested in what the story accomplishes. What is the purpose, and how does that stitch this tour into the next tour? Because this is the end of the Old Testament tour, and then the next tour you go to is the New Testament tour. So this actually makes them dovetail. But in a larger sense, what happens at the museum is that Christianity supersedes Judaism. I will stop sharing my screen now. There.
Thank you for sharing.
Can I just comment on Jesus's golden locks? Oh, sorry.
Erin, what did you say? Sorry.
Could I just comment on Jesus's golden locks?
Yes.
They were golden. Did you notice? I mean,
yeah, they are golden. Well, here's an interesting thing about this particular site.
Reflection from the ark, like making highlights.
No, it's because I love this site. I think it's so interesting in so many ways, but because it is such a mom and pop type shop of Christian tourist attractions, all of the wax figures in the museum are actually procured from other wax museums around the country that have gone under. So John Travolta is in this museum. Prince Philip shows up 3 times. Cleopatra is very clearly Elizabeth Taylor when she's young. So you can go through the museum and see lots of very recognizable famous figures who are repurposed for whatever. So I'm just assuming, I don't know where that Jesus came from, but they happen to have a guy, they stuck a beard and a wig on him, and and called him Jesus.
It is stunning how we instantly recognize, I mean, he's on the cross, so we can't miss it there, but we instantly
Right.
recognize Jesus as Jesus, white guy with a beard and long hair.
Yes, exactly. Also anachronistic and you know.
Yeah.
There are many with the borrowed or repurposed wax figures and the white Jesus. There are many layers of the anachronism, actually.
Yeah.
Erin,
Oh, you're muted. Oh.
I'm sorry, Erin, I'd like to ask you now to explain for us a little bit what you mean when you are talking about embodied mythic formation at the Bible Walk.
Sure, at the Holy Land experience, but I think
Sorry,
also
the
at
Holy
Bible
Land
Walk,
experience.
this is a concept that I think applies to all of these sites, and I don't think only religious sites. And I did forget to mention at the beginning that one of the chapters in the book is not a traditionally recognized religious site. It's a museum in Canada. It's the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. And I think this embodied mythic formation applies there. But briefly, this is, I'm not, first of all, Jen and I aren't the first people to talk about myth in this way. We're drawing on a history of scholarship. So just to make that clear. And so when I talk about embodied mythic formation, like the combination of those words, I think might be my own, but it's nothing new. And if you look at performance studies or theater studies, you do see people talking about how the body and how kind of the different sensations such as sight and touch and hearing and smell, how all of these things can impact the body in certain ways. So when I'm talking about this thing called embodied mythic formation, I'm talking about what we might call a practice-based form of inquiry, which kind of elicits a response in the tourist or the pilgrim or the, however we want to classify this visitor. It kind of elicits a particular response in the visitor, I think. And that response is reflection on oneself, reflection on, on other people, but also reflection upon one's place within the cosmos more broadly. Right. And so, when people are going through these sites, maybe they're walking through the Ark or through the Creation Museum or the Holy Land experience, they're prompted in very specific ways to think about how they fit within the mythic narrative, right? Not just, in Orlando, Florida at the Holy Land experience, which is, kind of close to, but not the same as Disney World, right? They're challenged to think about themselves in light of the Judean God who, sent his spirit to all these heroes, through time and space. So yeah, it's a practice-based form of inquiry. It's, it's an outsider terminology. It's trying to describe what happens to a visitor at these kinds of places. And I had some photos as well. If you wouldn't mind, I could show them.
I want to see some things, and maybe you can explain how they fit into the paradigm.
Yeah. So I mean, when I think about images, not images of Jesus, but ideas of Jesus at the Holy Land experience, they're multiple, right? There are multiple ideas of Jesus, and in addition, there are multiple Jesuses. They're played by kind of thin, tall men with long dark hair usually, and you can see them like on their off time. Maybe they're getting a coffee, maybe they're eating lunch, maybe they're in character and people are getting pictures with them or whatever. For whatever reason, there's a Jesus who's always on a motorcycle down there, at least a cardboard cutout of a Jesus on a motorcycle. I don't get it, but he's there.
I am just all of a sudden stuck on this idea that there are multiple Jesuses, literally multiple different actors portraying Jesus.
Well, there's so much going on. There's so much going on, right? There are theater performances, right? So, you know, every day the Passion of the Christ is shown. It's a drama, and so there's an actor there, and then there's communion with Jesus, where you can go and actually, let me just say, there are three things I wanted to talk about. There's a painting. There's the Last Supper or communion with Jesus, and then there's kind of Jesus on the cross. These are just three things that I have pictures of. So I'm going to share my screen and then talk about those.
Okay.
So the first, just really quick, is this painting that I wanted to share. Wow, I don't know what the screen looks like. What can you guys see?
I can see it pretty well.
Can you see a bunch of pictures together, or can you see one picture?
There's one picture.
One picture.
Okay. So, right. So there was this one section in the Holy Land experience that was really interesting. It was like an art gallery, and it was just jam-packed with paintings and icons, a lot of them Russian. And I actually talked to one of the people working there, and he said, yeah, we just acquired this whole, you know, this whole cache of icons from Russia. We're not even sure what they are at this point. We're still sorting through them. But that's not the point. This picture, I think, is interesting to illustrate what Jen and I and the authors are talking about when we talk about myth, involving a story about the past that is aimed to impinge on the present. Now my question is, how do I share to the next slide, I wonder?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of this was just, I think it was outside the temple or maybe the gift shop. It doesn't matter at this point, but here's a close-up of it. And I'm sharing this to illustrate how Jesus is involved in this myth making. So when you zoom in, yeah, right? When you zoom in, see that this is likely the Jesus from Revelation, because he has some writing on his thigh. I don't know if you can see that. I mean, this is just my guess that's what that writing on the thigh is about. When you read Revelation, it says that he has, you know, inscribed on his thigh. But he's mounting up on this horse. And in the background, you can kind of see some people also on horses raising up a flag that appears to be the United States flag, but right down the middle, covering it over, it says Jesus. So, you know, I don't know. This painting is called I'll Rise Again, painted by somebody named Marilyn Todd Daniels, but you know, this is one image of Jesus that is recurrent, at least at parts of the Holy Land experience, and that is the association of Jesus with the origins of the United States of America.
Manifest destiny.
Right, and you'll also find this at sorry, I'm drawing a blank, at the Bible Museum in DC. Yeah. And, you know, in a lot of kind of like traditional, well, not traditional, but certain lines of discourse about the origins of the United States. But this one was hit pretty heavily at the Holy Land experience, this idea that Jesus and the Bible were instrumental in the founding of the United States of America.
This is also an eschatological image, though, right?
Yes.
As the rider on the pale horse or something like that.
Yeah. Right. So here is another anachronism being inserted. Yeah. So then I wanted to just mention. Let's just open this one up to a new share. Did it work? The new share? It did
not yet.
New share. Here we go. So another thing that was important at the Holy Land experience, another idea of Jesus, is the Jesus who's being crucified. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a replica, supposed to be a replica of, you know, some mountains. And I'll click to the next picture in a second, but you can see this Jesus here kind of being put up onto some kind of a pole. It's not necessarily a cross, kind of hanging there, and there's a lot of blood around. fake blood, I presume, and I hope, on the side of this structure. Let me try to get a better picture of it right here. Here we go. Is that one showing up for you?
Yes. Okay.
So this is an interesting structure. This, at the same time, Golgotha, but inside it, there's also a little section that replicates Bethlehem, supposedly where Jesus, a cave in Bethlehem where Jesus was born, but also the Qumran caves. So at the Holy Land experience, this structure is representing lots of things all at once. So when I was there the second time, I went in and we had communion with Jesus. Meanwhile, Jesus was out here bloody and being crucified. So that's kind of the second image of Jesus that I wanted to mention. Here's another one. I don't know if you can see this. But there's also, right next door, replica of the tomb where he was buried and then reported to rise again. And interestingly, my friend Stephen Watkins, who also has a chapter in the book, pointed out to me that he reminded me that this version of the tomb of Christ is reminiscent of the Garden Tomb in Israel, right? Which is not the traditional Catholic and Orthodox Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is reminiscent of the Protestant site where you go to kind of reflect upon Jesus's resurrection. It's in a different area completely and has a totally different vibe. It's set up as a garden, but with that stone there, that's very much what that looks like. Let me see what else I had. This one's showing up now. The Mystery of the Upper Room. This is kind of the advertisement for going in with Jesus to take communion.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, it talks about that. But the communion, I mean, it looked like a little creamer container, and it had some juice in it. But you would peel off a clear layer on the top, and there's a little wafer, and you take that out and eat it, and then you peel back the next layer, and then inside that was the grape juice that represented the wine or the blood. So that was that. Let me stop sharing there, but I don't know, the ideas of Jesus present. I guess I'm trying to show that they're kind of pitched or packaged as these kind of historical moments that you can participate in. But oftentimes what's happening is they're positioned in such a way that the person, because of this embodiment, because of the embodied mythic formation, the person is being challenged to form themselves in a way that fits within a certain view of the cosmos, a certain line of history.
I'm fascinated by the site that you showed us that condenses together Golgotha, Bethlehem, and Qumran.
Yeah.
That tells us, just that juxtaposition tells a certain kind of story.
Right. And I may be mistaken that Golgotha is there too, but I'm pretty sure it is, because there are two of those things that looked a lot alike. Right.
Torture and then birth, and then also Qumran, which is tied in implicitly.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's convenient to stage it all together. You only have so much chicken wire and clay, but it's fascinating that they bring them together. Well, I have some follow-up questions, and I think, Erin, that you've answered this question, but maybe I need to just make it clear. Are all the Jesuses cutouts, or can you actually meet and even talk with a live Jesus at the Holy Land experience, like the way kids can meet Mickey Mouse at Disney World?
Yeah, I mean I'm talking about both cutouts and live people, right? So there are actors right? There are different productions, you know, that are put on. And so, you know, sometimes you might see the actor on his way to, you know, to the daily Passion play, or maybe afterwards. But you can also tell who these people are. Maybe somebody has just finished their shift and they've changed into jeans or whatever. They're pretty recognizable, these Jesuses. I remember seeing somebody coming through the gift shop and people were like, whoa, that's him. That's the guy we just saw in the play. But yeah, they're pretty recognizable.
Are you able actually to stand and be in the crowd while Jesus is being crucified?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a theater called the Church of All Nations, and there is a daily Passion play, and the crucifixion is I don't remember the minutes that it takes up, but it's a pretty significant chunk of time where he is being crucified, and the people are, you know, we're watching it. I mean, the theatrical version of a crucifixion.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's not no real nails, I assume.
No, but yeah, and you're right there with him when he does the Last Supper, and that's quite fascinating. So yeah, people can interact with him, and so
you really are you're in the story.
Yeah.
Bring it more than bringing the story to life with a movie. You're actually present there for it in these kinds of things.
Right, and the visitors are actively cued to think about how they relate to these situations. Right, it's not just a passive kind of mythic formation that I'm talking about. It's active cues, like where will you be when God, you know, draws up the final scroll? Will you be on that list with Jesus? You know, something like that. So,
well, I'm wanting to switch now to some here's some of what you might have to say about how we interpret what's going on at these sites. The historian of religions, Bruce Lincoln, has suggested that we ought to ask destabilizing questions about the materials we study. And so when it comes to Christian tourist attractions and the representations of Jesus that we see there, this approach to materials leads me, or should lead us, I think, to wonder about who's behind the attractions and what they hope to gain from them. So given how these attractions are representing Jesus and inviting readers in through participation or anachronism to see Jesus everywhere, what consequences are there for people who visit and consume these representations, and whose interests are being served?
I think that the answer to that question depends on the site. A place like the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. has just a completely different level of funding and political goal than a place like the Bible Walk Museum in Mansfield, Ohio.
Sure.
So, you know, Bible Walk is very small and local, and it's a result of a relationship between the museum and the churchgoers next door and their local desire to bring people in, as opposed to a place like the Museum of the Bible, which has a really clear political message about the founding of the United States, the centrality of the Bible in American history, the role that the Bible has in founding the United States, and an amassing of many, many artifacts, many of which are procured illegally, put in the service of that kind of message. And then the Creation Museum is kind of similar in some ways in that regard.
Jen, Erin, do you have a thoughts you might add to that?
Whose interests are served?
Yeah, and what are the consequences of people who consume these?
Yeah, I feel like first of all, I do agree that it depends on the site. But second of all, I think there is a target audience for some of these. The Bible Museum in DC. I mean, first of all, it's in DC for a reason, right? It's not in Chicago. It's not in, I don't know, San Diego.
Right.
It's in DC next to the other museums, presumably for the
dressed up like a Smithsonian.
Right. Right, but presumably to kind of account for and document the history of the United States of America. And so in many ways, I think one of the main interests and interest that is served is kind of this re-entrenchment of the idea that the US began as a Christian nation and therefore ought to remain as such. In all of this myth making, I still haven't figured out, why people are so compelled by arguments about origins. Why is it that if something began a certain way that it needs to remain that way? I don't know why. I don't know why people are vulnerable to that manner of persuasion, but they seem to be. And so I feel like a lot of this does have to do with kind of a certain manner of United States of America origin stories that impinge upon and elicit certain responses about what we should be today and who should be here and who shouldn't be here.
I wonder, the Bible Museum, or the Museum of the Bible in DC is so clear in its intent to be at the heart of power. What about Orlando and the Holy Land experience? Are they just attempting to scoop up some of the tourist dollar for themselves, or do they have an agenda about that goes to the heart of the nature of tourism itself? Or
well, I think both, and the Trinity Broadcasting Network, these organizations make a lot of money, and it's understandable in a country that also traces its origins to capitalism. I guess it's natural that those two should collide or converge in this way. But part of the origin story of the Holy Land experience is that, some Christian Zionists were interested in, evangelizing, right? Kind of spreading the word, and they wanted to do it in a way that was as compelling as a Disney or something like that.
Well, it's a way of shaping American tourist culture towards a Christian end. And evangelizing is part of the call of Christians, so it's understandable that they would use all the means at their disposal.
Yeah.
Well, Jen and Erin, we've actually been talking for 45 minutes or an hour or something like that, and I'm so glad to have spent this time with you. It's really interesting, and I hope that people will get interested, more people will get interested in your book, Christian Tourist Attractions. The subtitle is Mythmaking and
Identity Formation.
Identity Formation. It seems like a really important work, and I think that my students are going to really, and other viewers are going to benefit from having seen you talk about it a little bit.
I hope so.
I just had a really quick question. I haven't been able to watch all the previous podcasts, but is there a theme? Are there themes emerging for you, Matthew?
Are there themes emerging?
Ideas of Jesus. I'm just
what I'm seeing.
Curiosity.
What I'm seeing is that I ought to chart a longer term course through the variety of work that people are doing that touches on representations of Jesus in different contexts. There are no themes yet. I do see that there's a tendency of some people to be looking to uncover real representations of Jesus, or to disclose a realist account of early Christian materials, and there are others who are interested in looking at the variety of forces that go into shaping the representations of Jesus that we have. And I don't know that those two types of interest in the materials are really going in the same direction or not, but I'm interested in both. So, but I'd be happy to interview either of you again on other work that you do that touches on these themes, and I look forward to future conversations.
Okay. Thanks, Matthew. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matthew.
Hi to Matthew students.
Hi to Matthew students.